Side 3. Chapter 7. The Welcome Suite. Lloyd sat in the lorry, with the ropes biting into his wrists and ankles, and tried not to panic. Dinah and Ingrid must have... Surely they'd go straight to the police, and then the police would come storming into the sty to rescue them, and everything would be all right. It had to be. Dinah and Ingrid had to make the police come. But suppose they couldn't. Lloyd closed his eyes as he remembered the grey lady's icy voice. Take them to the sty, she had said. And the men in brown overalls had looked horrified, as if... The subliminal frame from the video danced behind Lloyd's eyelids. The image of the figure in the pig mask, the person with the terrible eyes. Who was Hunky Parker? Were they going to meet him? All the way down the motorway, Lloyd avoided Harvey's frightened face. There was nothing he could do to cheer him up. They just had to wait and see what happened when they reached the sty. It was several hours before they turned off the motorway. By then, the journey was almost over. For 20 minutes or so, the lorry turned left and right along narrow, twisting lanes, sending Lloyd and the others sliding from side to side. Then it bumped over a couple of humps in the road and rattled up a steep hill. They stopped at the top, and almost immediately the big back doors were flung open. "Take them to the welcome suite," said a sharp voice. For a second, Lloyd thought it was the grey lady from Parker Products. Then he saw that this one was taller. She was wearing exactly the same clothes, and she was just as impatient. "Get a move on," she said briskly, as the men in brown overalls appeared. "The weather is due to change in 68 minutes, and these four have to be ready for that." Weather? How could they be that sure about the weather? The men climbed into the van and seized Lloyd roughly. Dragging him to the back, they tossed him out onto the ground. "On your feet!" snapped the grey lady. As Lloyd struggled up, there was another thump, and Harvey landed beside him, trying not to cry. Lloyd gave him an encouraging nod, and he struggled to grin back through his gag. Thump. Thump. That was Ian and Mandy. The grey lady snapped out orders. "Take them to welcome room number 2 and process them. Use procedure 73. It's almost time for HP 9, and they must be kept out of the way until after that. Those are Hunky's orders." The men stood up very straight. "Hunky's orders will be obeyed," they chanted. There was something peculiar about the way they spoke, but Lloyd had no time to think about it. One of the men grabbed his arm and began to push him down the hill. They were in a car park, surrounded by a high brick wall. The ground sloped down towards the exit, and beyond that, Lloyd could see an assortment of strange roofs. The men hustled them through the gate, and they found themselves facing a long, low building with a huge sign over the door. "Welcome to my sty. Trot in and park your bacon." The walls were splattered with brown stains and covered with grinning Hunky Parker faces beaming in all directions. Lloyd shivered at the sight of them. The men didn't take any notice. They pushed their prisoners through the door and into a big room with a large television screen and 2 rows of easy chairs. Another grey lady was there to meet them. "These are the snoopers for procedure 73. The men nodded, and she waved a hand at the prisoners. "Sit them down." One of the men knocked Lloyd backwards into a chair in the front row facing the screen. Mandy, Harvey and Ian were pushed down too, and the men slid into chairs behind, ready to grab anyone who moved. The grey lady picked up a remote control. "Watch," she ordered. The screen flickered and grew bright, and Hunky Parker's horrible, smug voice filled the room. "You made it. Now sit back and enjoy your first educated holiday, where even the weather does what you want." "No," thought Lloyd. He wasn't going to watch another video with hidden pictures. Why should he let himself be tricked again? He closed his eyes. The grey lady slapped the side of his face. "Watch!" Angrily, he opened his eyes again and glared at the screen. There was Hunky Parker, waddling towards a bright red door. The door opened, and Lloyd shrank back into his chair. Green eyes flamed out from behind the pig mask, staring straight at him. The ordinary comic pig had disappeared, and they were watching the real Hunky Parker. This time, he didn't flash past. The camera moved into close-up until the mask filled the screen and the huge, luminous eyes stared out at them. And then the figure spoke. "You have come a long way. You must be feeling tired and sleepy. Very, very sleepy." Lloyd felt as though he had been punched in the chest. That voice. Here? It was impossible. "Look into my eyes," the voice murmured. "Look deep, deep into my eyes." Harvey was sitting bolt upright, and next to him, Ian and Mandy were breathlessly still. They knew the voice too. Once upon a time, they had heard it every day at school. It was the headmaster's voice. And the eyes! Lloyd gazed at them. Why hadn't he recognized them before? Those cold, sea-green eyes that could take over almost anybody. Even Dinah hadn't had a chance against those eyes. And now the headmaster was Hunky Parker, and he was using the welcome suite to hypnotize everyone who came to the sty. Lloyd's mind moved like lightning. The Grey Lady mustn't guess that the four of them couldn't be hypnotized. If she did, they might be in desperate danger. They had to pretend. Quickly he leaned forward, fixing his eyes on the screen. Then, when he was sure the others were watching him, he let his eyelids droop, slowly and deliberately, as though the headmaster's voice was sending him to sleep. There was no way of explaining. They had to understand. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Mandy's eyes widen in astonishment. For one awful second, he thought she was going to give everything away. Then she realized what he was up to. Turning back to the screen, she let her eyelids droop too. So did Ian and Harvey. Lloyd felt weak with relief, but there was no time to relax, because the soft, soothing voice from the screen suddenly changed. "Open your eyes," it snapped. "Here are your instructions." For almost an hour, the voice talked steadily, filling their heads with complicated details that went on and on. "Listen to this sound. At the first whistle you will stand absolutely still. At the second one you will follow the woman in grey overalls. You will do the work that is given to you. You will remember nothing of what happens outside the dome. You will obey the woman in grey overalls." None of it made any sense to Lloyd. Surely the sty was a holiday place. What was all the talk about work? The video didn't give any explanation, just orders and more orders. Lloyd struggled to remember them all. He knew he had to obey them as though they were implanted in his brain, but by the end of the video his head was spinning. There was no time to collect his thoughts. As the screen went fuzzy, the Grey Lady turned off the machine. Then she walked briskly up to him, hauled him to his feet and ripped off the gag. "Those are Hunky's orders," she said crisply. For a split second Lloyd fumbled for an answer. Then it came back to him, and he chanted it mechanically. "Hunky's orders will be obeyed." The Grey Lady nodded, satisfied, and waved to the men to untie him. Then she moved on to take off Mandy's gag. "Those are Hunky's orders." Lloyd held his breath. But all the others had the right idea, even Harvey. The answers snapped back, almost before the Grey Lady had finished speaking. "Hunky's orders will be obeyed." When they were all untied, the Grey Lady nodded again and marched across the room to a door on the far side, away from the car park. "Take them straight to the dome," she snapped. "They must be handed over before the weather changes." A hand was planted in the middle of Lloyd's back, propelling him towards the door. He stepped through, just behind Harvey, and gaped. They were staring across a large, grassy space. On each side, the ground sloped down. To the left, it was covered with hundreds of brightly painted chalets, and to the right, a huge, ugly grey building straggled down the hill. But Lloyd hardly glanced at any of that. Because in the middle, looking back at him across the grass, was Hunky Parker's face. But it was Hunky Parker blown up to a nightmare size. His chin rested on the ground, his ears were 15 meters up in the air, and his spiteful piggy eyes gleamed like two enormous searchlights above a cavernous mouth. And he was moving. The bristly ears twitched backwards and forwards. Left, right, and black numbers flickered inside the nostrils. Numbers that changed. 1342, 1343, 1344. As he marched across the grass, Lloyd realized that he was walking towards a gigantic clock. The ears ticked in time to the seconds, and the hours and minutes showed in the nostrils. But that wasn't all. There were things moving in the mouth as well, things that looked like people, muttered Mandy under her breath. Lloyd nodded. The nightmare face wasn't just a clock. It was the front of a building, and its wide-open mouth was the doorway. Behind big glass doors, people in bright clothes were strolling about. But it was a very weird building. Behind Hunky's face, glass walls curved up and away in a gigantic dome that flashed in the midday sun. The inside of the dome was full of something white and glittering. Waiting by the door was yet another grey lady, with the same sharp expression as the others. But her overalls were thick and padded, like a ski suit, and she was wearing ski boots on her feet. "Snow today," she said crisply. She held out 4 bright blue ski suits and 4 knitted hats. "Put these on." "You will obey the women in grey overalls." Quickly, Lloyd pulled on one set of clothes and sat down to tug on the boots. Ian was already lacing his up, and Mandy was helping Harvey to wriggle into his suit. In a few moments, all 4 of them were standing in line, waiting for instructions. The grey lady pushed open one of the glass doors and pointed into the gaping pig mouth. "In you go!" Side by side, trying not to shudder, they stepped over the threshold. Instantly, they were hit by freezing cold air. Behind the pig face, it was winter, and the dome was full of snow. It crunched under their feet and fluttered in flakes from the ceiling, cushioning every ledge. On one side, some children were building snowmen and having a snowball fight. And over the far side, against the back wall, was a hot dog stand with a huge banner draped above it. "Sun tomorrow, snow today." But what dominated the whole dome was the enormous slide in the middle that swooped from ceiling to floor in a rippling cascade, carpeted with snow. The circular staircase that led to the summit was full of people with skis climbing towards the shelter at the top. When they reached it, they disappeared inside and put on their skis. They came zooming down the slide in a steady stream, one behind the other, like a mammoth, multicoloured waterfall. Lloyd frowned. It certainly looked like a holiday place. Why had all the headmaster's instructions been about work? The grey lady stood behind them, blocking the doorway. "Enjoy yourselves, but don't meddle. What does Hunky say?" Lloyd was so busy staring into the dome that for a moment he didn't remember what he was meant to do. Suddenly, he realized that she was looking suspiciously at him. What was he supposed to say? Desperately, he tugged at Ian's sleeve, hoping he could remember the right reply. But it was too late. The grey lady's eyes hardened, and she whirled round to call back the men in brown overalls. "These 4 have not been properly processed." There was no time to lose. Immediately, the men turned and began to run towards them. Lloyd grabbed Harvey's sleeve and escaped in the only direction he could. He charged straight into the dome, with Ian and Mandy right behind him. There wasn't much hope of escaping with the men so close, but Lloyd dragged Harvey into the middle of the nearest crowd and then looked over his shoulder for the others. He couldn't see them. The The whole dome was full of people in red and blue snowsuits, with woolly hats pulled down over their eyes. Through the fluttering snowflakes, everyone looked the same. Lloyd had to stand still and look very carefully to spot Ian and Mandy. And if he couldn't spot them, perhaps they could escape. If they walked calmly through the crowd, they might be able to hide somewhere before the men found them. Frantically, Lloyd looked round the dome. He could see the men at the doorway now, looking round for them. There were no corners to hide in, no little buildings to duck behind. Even the hot dog stand was right up against the back wall. And there was nothing else except the ski slide. The slide. Lloyd leaned close to Harvey and whispered in his ear, "Come on, head for the slide." "But—" Harvey swallowed as Lloyd began heading towards the bottom of the spiral staircase. "We'll break our legs." "We're not going to ski," hissed Lloyd. He glanced over his shoulder to make sure that Ian and Mandy were following. "We're going to hide in the cabin at the top." Harvey frowned. "Forever?" "Of course not, you ding-brain." Lloyd rolled his eyes. "Just until this place shuts down for the night." "But—" "Marigold marzipan, come on! If we hang around here, the men are sure to find us." Hauling Harvey after him, Lloyd ploughed through the snow towards the gigantic slide. Chapter 8. The Workshop. Dinah and Ingrid were battered black and blue as they travelled up the motorway. The big wooden crates slid around in the back of their lorry, crashing against them and scratching them with rough corners, and Ingrid moaned every time one hit her. But Dinah hardly noticed. She was desperately trying to remember everything she'd read about the sty. "It's a holiday place, isn't it, Ing? And there's something peculiar about the weather there." "Sun and snow together," Ingrid frowned. "There's even snow there in the summer. When I was in Wales at Auntie Rachel's, the papers kept having competitions to win holidays there." "But why would they take Lloyd and the others somewhere like that?" Ingrid shrugged. "How should I know? Ouch! Stop going on about it. We'll find out soon enough." But it didn't seem soon. They were travelling for hours, first on the motorway and then on a narrow, twisting road. And all the time, Ingrid grew crosser and crosser, and Dinah got more worried. Then suddenly, they bumped over a hump in the road, followed by another one. Dinah sat bolt upright. "Ing, I think we're almost there." "So?" Ingrid yawned. "We've got to hide." "Here?" snorted Ingrid. "Oh, brilliant. Let's climb into the crate, shall we, and pretend to be bundles of baby clothes." It was meant as a joke, but Dinah didn't laugh. "That's the only thing we can do," she said firmly, "and it might work. They're pretty strong crates, and they've got lids." She pushed Ingrid towards the nearest one and helped her climb in. Then she jammed the lid on top of her. "I'd need a hammer to fix it properly, but it doesn't look too bad." "I'll probably suffocate," Ingrid grumbled. "The air'll last longer if you don't talk," Dinah said. She was climbing into the next crate. She wasn't going to waste time quarrelling. She needed to work out how to put a lid over herself when she was already inside. In the end, she found 2 nails sticking through the edges of the lid and held on to them. It wasn't very secure, but it was the best she could do. There was no time to do anything different, because the lorry was backing into position, ready to stop. Dinah took a deep breath and braced herself, waiting for the doors to open. But they didn't. She heard a clang as other doors were unfastened, but no one moved on to their lorry. Instead, there was a buzz of talk, too far away for her to make out any words. Then several pairs of feet marched past them and out of earshot, and still no one came. "I bet we'll be here for weeks," grumbled Ingrid. "For years. We'll starve to death. When they open the crates, they'll find our skeletons." "Shh," hissed Dinah, "or someone will come." "No, they won't," Ingrid said crossly. "I bet we're in the middle of a forest, or halfway up a mountain with not a house in sight, or—" "Shh! But I can't just huddle here. It's been hours. Ingrid stopped dead. Brisk footsteps were coming towards their lorry. 1 pair of high heels with metal tips and 2 pairs of flat shoes. "Unload this one first," said a woman's crisp voice. "I'll go into my office and get the documents." Dinah and Ingrid were very still now. They hunched inside their boxes, hardly daring to breathe. There was a rattle and a clang as the doors were unfastened and flung open. Suddenly it was much lighter in the boxes. Dinah could see the wooden sides and the 2 bent nails that she was clutching. She gripped them firmly and hoped. The next moment she was tipped sideways as her box was lifted into the air. "Thought all these crates were empty," said a man's voice, grumbling. "This one weighs a ton. What's it got inside?" "Search me," said the other man. "Think we ought to take a look?" Dinah froze. They were going to pull off the lid. They were going to drag her out of the box. But the first man was hesitating. And when he replied, it was in a strange, sing-song voice. "What does Hunky say?" The answer came back in exactly the same mechanical sing-song. "Hunky says no snooping." A slow shiver went up Dinah's back. That was how the people at Parker Products had talked. And it reminded her of something, but it was impossible to think. Her whole body jarred as her box was flung down onto a trolley. Then it thudded again as another box was dumped on top. "That one's heavy too," said the grumbling voice. "Think this is the right load?" "We'll ask the dispatch coordinator when we get them inside. Come on." The boxes tilted again as the trolley was tipped up and the wheels rattled down a slope. There was a little crack in the wood close by Dinah's eye, and she leaned forward to peer through it. They were being wheeled down a long, narrow car park towards a gate at the far end. Ahead of them was a small building with garish paintings on the walls and some words over the door. "Come to my in and park your Before Dinah could make them out properly, the trolley swung right round the building. She caught a brief glimpse of a high, glittering dome. Glass? And then found herself staring at a blank wall. She was outside a building that looked like a vast factory. It was huge and grey, sprawling down the slope to the right, and its walls were perfectly plain. There was no window and no nameplate to show what happened inside. The trolley clattered through the nearest door, and Dinah saw a thin, upright figure marching towards them carrying a clipboard. A grey lady, like the one at Parker Products. "Over there!" she snapped. "These crates aren't empty," said the man who was pushing the trolley. "Think we ought to look inside?" The grey lady sighed impatiently and rattled her nails on her clipboard. "Where are the documents that go with them?" "There aren't any documents." "Of course there are. If goods are being sent back, there'll be documents to tell us why. You must have left them in the lorry." "We didn't see any." The grey lady sighed again, even more impatiently, and tucked her clipboard under her arm. "Oh, I suppose I shall have to find them myself. Come on." Her heels clicked on the concrete floor as she marched over to the door, and the men followed her, muttering under their breath. Dinah knocked on the lid of her crate. "Ing," she called very softly. "Is that you up there?" "Thank goodness," Ingrid called back. "I didn't know what had happened to you." She sounded nervous, but Dinah had no time to reassure her. The grey lady wouldn't be gone for long. "Can you see out? Is there anyone else around?" There was a creak as Ingrid heaved off the top of her crate. Then she scrambled out with a lurch and lifted the crate off the trolley. "Give me your lid, Di." "Thanks." Gratefully, Dinah scrambled out. "Put them back the way they were. Quickly, we've got to hide." For once, Ingrid didn't argue. She jammed the lid back on the top crate and slid it into place while Dinah glanced round the storeroom. "Maybe we could hide behind one of those piles of boxes." "I've had enough of boxes," Ingrid said firmly. "What's behind that door? The one over there." She pointed to a door on the far side of the store. It stood slightly ajar, and through the glass panel in the top, Dinah could see the top of a filing cabinet. "It must be the grey lady's office. Let's go and see." Darting across the storeroom, Ingrid disappeared into the office. There was nothing Dinah could do except follow her. By the time she caught up, Ingrid was at the back of the office. "Look, there's another door here." She waved her hand at the glass panel. "We can get out on this side." She pressed down the handle as Dinah peered through at the narrow grey corridor beyond. but the door was locked. Ingrid scowled, but there was no time to do anything else. Already they could hear the grey lady's spiky footsteps coming towards the storeroom. "Quick!" hissed Dinah. "Duck down behind the filing cabinets." They crouched low, well out of sight of the store. Out there the grey lady was shouting at the men. "If there are no documents, the crates must be empty. Look!" She flung the lids to the floor with a clatter, and there was a dissatisfied mumble from the men. The grey lady didn't take any notice. "You'd do better to get on with the job and mind your own business," she snapped. "What does Hunky say?" Behind the filing cabinets, Dinah held her breath. That question again. And the reply came back mechanically, just as she expected. "Hunky says no snooping." "They're like robots," hissed Ingrid. She shuddered. Dinah nodded and let her eyes travel round the office. The most striking thing there was a large notice stuck on the wall beside the desk. The months of the year were listed in big black letters with words filled in beside them. January, February, March, April the 1st to the 13th, Hunky Parker. April the 13th, HP9. April the 14th to the 30th, May, June, Ape. Controlled riots. July, total takeover. Controlled riots. Dinah had a sudden sharp memory of the crowd marching down the hill outside the bookshop. Was that a controlled riot? If so, who was controlling it? And were there going to be more of them? The corner where she was crouching felt suddenly very chilly. If only they could get through that other door and see where the grey corridor led. Maybe they would find out something then. If only the door hadn't been locked. And then she saw the keys. A fat bunch of keys, hanging on a hook beside the desk. She nudged Ingrid. "I'll go and try them," she mouthed. "Keep still." Very carefully, she inched across the floor, keeping one ear on the grey lady's voice as she snapped out orders to the men in brown overalls. With her heart pounding, she stuck up a hand towards the hook. No one saw her. A second later, she was huddled at the foot of the door, sorting through the keys. Not that one, or that one. But maybe that, or that. It was the 5th key she tried. It turned smoothly in the lock, without a sound, and the door handle went down easily. Dinah wriggled back to the desk to hang up the keys. Then she stuck her head up cautiously to see what was going on in the storeroom. The grey lady was standing with her back to them, checking off the crates as the men brought them in, and the trolley rattled very loudly. The next time the men came in, Dinah touched Ingrid's elbow. "Quick," she mouthed. They slithered across the floor, Dinah in front and Ingrid a few feet behind. Dinah's heart pounded, but the rattle of the trolley covered the noise as the door opened. She crawled through it and down the corridor to the first corner. Wherever that corridor led, it couldn't be more dangerous than staying in the grey lady's office. She waited for Ingrid and then stood up. "Let's get going, shall we?" Ingrid scrambled to her feet, looking smug. "Look what I've got." She held out her hand. There, swinging from one finger, was the fat bunch of keys. "You idiot!" Dinah gasped. "If she sees they're missing, she'll know someone's been in her office. Put them back." "Shan't," said Ingrid. She stuck out her tuster on tiptoe toward Dinah ran too. It was stupid to take risks like that. They had to put the keys back. She would make Ingrid. But she didn't make Ingrid do anything, because she didn't catch up with her until the corner. And when they reached the corner, they saw something that made them both stop dead. Something that drove the keys right out of Dinah's mind. Round the corner, the corridor was wider, and one side of it was made up of big windows. But they were not windows to the outside. They looked into a huge room, crowded with brightly dressed people. There were men and women and children, some of them in swimsuits and some in shorts or sundresses, all ready for the beach. But they were nowhere near a beach. They were sitting in front of machines or bent over conveyor belts. Every single one, man, woman, or child, was working flat out. And all their faces were completely blank and glazed. Huge machines spewed out garish plastic toys. Sewing machines whizzed round the sides of fancy T-shirts and tracksuits. An enormous printing press was thudding away in the background, turning out heaps of luridly coloured books. Everything in the room was bright and lively, except the people. There were hundreds of them tending the machines, but no one smiled or spoke. They all stared straight down at what they were doing, almost without blinking. Ingrid's mouth fell open.
I thought we were at the sty. But those people aren't on holiday.
They're dressed as if they were, Dinah said grimly.
There's something very odd going on, Ing. It's much too cold for beach clothes. Do you think...
She didn't finish what she was saying. At that moment, a loud, shrill noise split the air, a whistle blast amplified to a deafening level. Immediately, all the people in the workshop stopped what they were doing and stepped back from the machines. They stood motionless, as though they were waiting for something to happen, and all their faces were completely blank. The grey lady marched up and down between the machines, looking from side to side. Click, click, click. Her sharp metal heels seemed to measure the seconds as the big black hands swept round the clock face. Then the whistle sounded again. Immediately, the frozen figures began to move. One behind the other, marching in step, they filed out of a door at the far end, walking like robots, with blank faces. In a few seconds, the workshop was empty, except for the grey lady. Chapter 9. Sun tomorrow? Lloyd could see the men in brown overalls fanning out across the dome, like hounds searching for a scent. He longed to race to the ski slide, but he knew they'd be spotted if he did. He had to plod along, slowly, like the other holidaymakers. By the time he and Harvey reached the bottom of the circular staircase, the men were zigzagging methodically from one side of the dome to the other. Lloyd forced himself to stop at the ski stall at the bottom of the stairs and wait while the man in charge found him a pair of skis. Then, at last, he began to climb. Once he was above the heads of the crowd, he could see the whole snow-filled dome. It was easy to spot the men who were following them. They looked cold and shivering, but they didn't stop searching for a moment. Right and left, behind and in front, from side to side and all around, but not up. Lloyd crossed his fingers and went on climbing. By the time he hauled himself up into the cabin at the top of the staircase, his arms ached and he was out of breath, but the men still hadn't spotted them. There were several people in the cabin, putting on skis, but no one hung around. The moment the skis were on, the skiers stepped onto the slide and disappeared in a flurry of snow, followed by the next people, and the next, and the next. When Ian and Mandy arrived, they huddled into a corner of the cabin beside Lloyd and Harvey, but no one else stopped long enough to notice them. The skiers passed through at top speed, cascading over the top and down the slide. Lloyd took a look through the slatted side of the cabin. Then he beckoned to the others to lean close.
"You've got to think."
"Are you sure there's time?" murmured Ian.
"I don't want to worry you, but look down there."
Lloyd glanced down. The staircase was almost empty. 3 or 4 people were still climbing, but below them there was nobody. The man who'd been handing out skis stood at the bottom with an arm out, closing the staircase off.
"He's found us," Harvey said miserably. "He's going to come up and get us."
But the man didn't move. He just stood there looking at his watch from time to time and shaking his head at people who tried to get past him. The last skier stepped into the cabin, fastened his skis, and disappeared down the slide. When he reached the bottom, a loud whistle echoed across the snow, and everything stopped. Every person in the dome stood absolutely still. Even the children were motionless, with snowballs in their hands. No one made a sound, and nothing moved except a snowball that was thrown just as the whistle sounded. It flew across the dome and hit a red-faced man square on the nose. But he didn't even blink. He went on staring straight ahead, as though nothing had happened. Then there was a loud, grating, creaking noise. Mandy gasped and pointed at the far wall of the dome. The whole thing was swivelling, including the hot dog stand and the sun tomorrow, snow today banner. It turned in its place like a revolving door, rotating until it stuck straight out into the dome. On either side of it yawned an enormous dark gap leading into the space behind. There was another blast on the whistle. Perfectly together, moving like machines, all the people in the dome began to walk towards the gaps, forming neat, well-spaced lines and marching exactly in step. Only the men in brown overalls stood still, left on their own, dark splodges on the whiteness of the snow. As the last person disappeared behind the far wall, a door opened in the side of the dome, and there was the guttural sound of an engine. In came a huge snowplow, driven by a man in brown overalls. Briskly it began to move round the dome, pushing the snow towards the back wall and through the gaps. When the ground was almost clear, there was a loud click, and then a whirring sound. Suddenly, a gust of wind hit the cabin on the top of the slide, whistling between the slats. Looking round, Lloyd saw two giant fans whirring on the wall above the front door of the dome. He couldn't see them for long. By the time they got up to full speed, the air was full of flying snow. The wind caught it and whirled it up into the air, blowing it off all the ledges, across the dome, and out into the black space at the back.
"I'm cold,"
stuttered Harvey, his teeth chattering. The snow was blowing into the shelter, catching on his face and stinging his cheeks.
"Quick!"
Mandy put one arm round him and one round Ian, pulling them towards her.
"Huddle together before we freeze."
The four of them formed a tight knot, with their backs to the flying snow, and the wind roared on and on, whipping round the backs of their necks and nipping their fingers. They were so busy sheltering from it that they didn't have time to think about anything else. Until they began to get hot. Quite suddenly, they found themselves gasping and panting for air, and Harvey pulled away from the huddle.
"I can't breathe," he panted. "I'm boiling."
Lloyd stepped back too, loosening the neck of his ski suit.
"You're right. Scarlet sausages. It's like an oven in here."
He leaned over to look between the slats, and gasped.
"It's changed. It's changed completely."
End of Side 3.